episode 14 of the XrmToolCast. This will be an episode devoted to unit testing, as we have for the first time two guests, Jordi Montaña, and also for the first time a return guest, the Xrm Wizard himself, Magnus. Each of these developers, as well as myself, have our own unit testing framework, and we devote this entire episode to discussing the advantages to using one or the other, where they're different, and kind of how they came to be. With the hope that people listening will use one of these frameworks, especially with the hope that people will not create their own, because it's a lot of work to do that. So we dive into the differences, and we dive into the biggest reason to use unit testing with plugins and workflows. We also touch on being able to use these unit testing frameworks in a client-side testing scenario as well. Hope you enjoy learning about unit testing, because this is all devoted to that. So, let's get started.
Hi and welcome to XrmToolCast episode 14. We're going to test all the things, and to do that we have three distinguished guests, or rather two guests and one co-host that's also very involved in this testing framework stuff. So we have Jordi Montaña, welcome.
Thank you, Jonas.
And we have Magnus Sørensen from Denmark. Is that correct? I hope that's so. That's right. So welcome,
Good.
Magnus.
Thank you.
And of course, we have Daryl far away in the States, recording live from, wherever, Indy. Hi,
Yeah.
Daryl. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm the only person this side of the Atlantic, so I'm feeling kind of lonely over here.
Yeah. It's evening for us. It's morning for you.
Well, it's afternoon, but yeah.
Yeah, all right. So, we're talking testing. Testing. What do we want to test? And Daryl, should you sort of pave the way into the testing framework?
Okay. So I guess I'll start back with kind of the history of when I learned about the other testing frameworks. How about that? So, and then when we go through and do that, I'll have Jordi even do an introduction when his turn comes around here. But so back in 2012, I started trying to do unit testing of C# plugins. And I started doing it, trying to use the things that were free and things that were included in Visual Studio, and that included the MS Fakes ability, and that was just extremely painful. If you try to do an actual fake or an actual mock where you're just saying, hey, based on this input, give this output, and do it for every single query, it just was killing me. So I found a C# database that was on GitHub, and then I used that and wrote a little organizational service implementation in front of it to handle intercepting all the queries and mapping them to an actual backend database that would run locally. And I was super excited about it and posted it out there, but I had actually zero documentation, and as a account of that reason, very few people, if anybody, ever started using it. And then I heard about Jordi Montaña and his framework, and I immediately got on a phone call with him, just a Skype call, to say hello and see, just figure out what his framework was, how it worked, and how we solved kind of the same issues. So, Jordi, why don't you go ahead and take it away? So, mention who you are, because no one else knows who you are, and maybe no one on this podcast knows who you are, and give a little background of what FakeXrmEasy, how that came about.
Yeah, well, again, it's a pleasure to be here today with you guys. My name is basically Jordi, and I'm based in Tarragona, which is this kind of small city in Tarragona, in Catalunya, I mean, and which is part of Spain. When basically, in my case, when I started working with unit testing, was really, well, the first time I think I was kind of using it was when around the same year, because we were using internally, but we were using basically FakeXrmEasy, which we didn't use Microsoft Fix like yourself, but we started doing some testing with unit test with FakeXrmEasy, which is another like open source framework for doing just plain .NET unit testing. And basically the rationale was that because I was finding myself, doing loads of repetitive works and repetitive tasks like trying to mock the CI messages, the queries, that kind of stuff, then, I was basically trying to search if there was something available on the internet, and if it was basically open source. And that was around 2014, I think it was. Because, I didn't find anything. I started working on the FakeXrmEasy around November 2014, I think. And the idea was to basically have a open source project that could just mock the queries from CRM and the CRM messages, so that you could basically do simplify unit testing while at the same time trying to have a experience that would let you code against CRM but without CRM.
Yeah, let me stop you right there, Jordi. So basically, just for our listeners to understand, our developer listeners that are understanding what these frameworks are, and all three of these frameworks offer the same exact solution, basically the same exact value add basically to the standard unit testing. By default, when you do normal unit testing using just standard .NET frameworks, you basically have to define every single call what the expected inputs and expected outputs are in order to generate that fake or that mock object, whatever terminology you're using. And all three of these frameworks that we have say, wow, that's really horrible. What we're going to do is we're going to make an in-memory kind of CRM instance, and you will connect to it just like it's any other instance. You don't know that it's in memory, and you do your queries, you do your link statements, you do your fetch XML, you do your retrieve multiple, whatever you're doing, you do it, and it will go against an in-memory database that you have and return it back. So that way you can actually do unit testing and test-driven development in seconds, rather than trying to do all the stuff that takes a whole bunch of pain to go through and either A, write out, or B, write out and to use going forward. So so that's just for those in the room that maybe Jonas, who isn't that familiar with unit testing, would have an idea what's going on.
That's great. And from my ignorant tester perspective, when you're talking about, it mocks or emulates the queries you make for CRM and to retrieve data and update data and so on. Is there any method to, how to compose that data that you want to test against? Or do you have to write the lines to actually insert it in the in-memory database? Or are there any easier ways to do that with either of your frameworks?
Yeah, well, in my case, basically, you can do it. There are different options. One is basically you can just you can code the actual data. Like if you were, for example, creating a new instance of a contact record, you can do it in code. Other people, from my own experience, they're kind of reading data from a JSON file as well. But each approach basically has pros and cons. The pro with the coding syntax is because it's in line, it's in the code. It's way more maintainable because you can do things like refactor, rename, and also because it's in the code, it runs a lot faster. Whereas the other approach using a JSON file, because it has to hit the disk, then it's way slower than the other one. On the other hand, basically with JSON file or a CSV file, you can basically export from a CRM instance, and then just maybe for setting up the data initially is not that much complicated, but then, as I was saying, in the long term, basically it gets more difficult to maintain.
Yeah, I would think, the performance of the testing, if you have it in memory or to a JSON file, I would assume that's quite a minor difference. If we're still comparing to working against the CRM, which we know is a few multiples slower than that anyway.
That depends on how many tests you have.
We
have projects with 1,200 tests, right?
Well, I'm thinking of starting with one.
Yeah. But also, if you use JSON and have that test data, if you need to bulk your test data, then you're probably testing incorrectly. And you probably have a too complicated test. You should probably simplify it, because someone else has to understand the test.
Yeah. And even if you basically write the code for simulate the data, you can always refactor, and they are always like, for example, one feature you want to implement, we have kind of different variations of the same scenario with just changing, for example, a couple of fields for some data. You can always refactor all of that data into one place, and then just for each unit test, you just change the one thing you need to change for that test, and it's more maintainable. But it does make a difference when reading from disk. For example, if I had to replace the unit test I have for FakeXrm, so because FakeXrm has like 4,000 tests itself, it would take like from 20 milliseconds each to like 1 second each, which, for 4,000, I cannot be waiting for a day, to run tests. So it does make a difference in the long term.
Yeah. Okay. And I'd like to touch on another thing that you mentioned. I mean, if you have that type of testing, you're probably testing in the wrong way. It gets too complicated to understand. And I think that's sort of a philosophical challenge I have with the automated testing overall. I mean, if you have the tests small and precise to the small methods, you're testing those that they perform as they should, or that they do what they should, then the test sort of gets unnecessary because it's testing such a small rudimentary piece of code. It's the more complex scenarios. That's when I feel I really want the automated testing, when it would take half a day for a person to sit there and change the data and set up the data. You want to automate that, not just testing the leaf methods or the isolated methods. Is that also handled in this, or are your frameworks focusing on testing the small parts? The
XrmMockup handles that. XrmMockup is an integration test framework, not a unit test framework.
So how do you get the data to test with there? Is it are we talking about these JSON files that you
No, that's the same thing. It's the same thing. Yeah, I would also opt for writing code. But I mean, instead, so if you use FakeXrmEasy and you want to test a plugin, you have to register the plugin, execute the plugin, if I understand it correctly. XrmMockup just looks for all your plugins and your workflows from your CRM instance, and then handles all that execution indirectly for you.
Yeah, but the test data is still, you have to sort of create that. Either you write the code for it, or can you upload it? Can you extract it from CRM and from a CRM instance and use that? Or
but usually you're testing user scenarios. It usually doesn't depend that much on data. It depends on like small changes in data, right? You usually have some base.
In my experience, it's the interaction with data where it can get complicated. I mean, otherwise it's just code, and you know how to test your code. But when unexpected data situations arise, that's when you get the issues that you don't expect, that you want test cases to catch.
Well, but can I just flag something? Basically, so for example, just in relation to the data question, even though you can, for example, in our case, we work with user stories that we try to break down user stories so that they don't take longer than a day, for example, because if something is bigger than a day, basically, it's difficult to estimate, and then basically you run with project kind of management issues. But even though you don't have to have a bunch of records to test a complex scenario, that's what I'm trying to say. So for example, you could have a user story that basically, and just reading from the user requirements, you might need to basically build some logic around, like, say, for example, 7 or 8 different entities. So the way I'm using it is basically but for those 7 or 8 entities, I don't have to have, like 100 records of each. Just the minimum records so that I can just fulfill that requirement. And sometimes basically I just need to define like 7 records in memory, and the scenario basically changes to say, whenever, for example, this field from this entity is whatever value, then do this, otherwise do this other thing. And so there's not that much data to set up for, at least from my own experience. But again, with FakeXrm, you can also use something called a pipeline simulation. So you don't have to register the plugins. You only need to unit test the plugins that you're actually referencing in the unit test project. You don't have to register those. But you can enable something called pipeline simulation that basically, whenever you execute a message, basically it tries to search if there was something registered for that message when you use that pipeline simulation, and it will execute it. That was actually a pull request that was introduced by somebody in the Netherlands. I think it was called Michael Humpers.
So Jordi, that's being able to say basically, hey, I have this plugin that I've registered that's a update, or maybe it's a plugin that runs on Create, and I'm going to run this other plugin that's going to trigger that first plugin indirectly, and so I'm going to set up my pipeline to say, hey, I want this to happen in my unit test. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, exactly.
And Magnus, your framework has the ability to do that as well, correct? Or is that just the FakeXrmEasy?
Yeah, but so you have to specify which plugins you register, Jordi, or or does it do it automatically?
I'll need to double check it, but I think it's just based on the messages.
Yeah, but okay. So the way XrmMockup does this is that we fetch your plugins and workflow registrations and so on from your CRM instance, and then you point us to your plugins locally, and then we automatically do all this plumbing. You don't have to register your plugins. We already know it based upon your CRM system. So the only way you can interact with XrmMockup is by doing this pipeline simulation that FakeXrmEasy has, basically. Yeah.
So let's let me step back over here and give kind of my understanding of how the differences in the framework, or it really the differences in the. Actually, we never even mentioned. Let's mention the names of them first. So I have the XrmUnitTest. Jordi has the FakeXrmEasy, and Magnus has the XrmMockup. I believe I got all those names right. And the way that I see it in my head and envision it in my head is it all depends on how much of a dependency you want to actually take on your actual instance of CRM versus in your actual unit test itself. Where the FakeXrmEasy feels like you don't need early binding, you don't need anything, you can just go ahead and start typing code and start running tests. Mine, I need to have the early binding set up, and I have a lot of work to be able to go through and run it in memory or not in memory, or not against the real life version of CRM or not against the real life version of CRM. And then the XrmMockup is going through and that's saying, hey, give me an org and I'm going to do the best I can to faithfully recreate that org in your unit test without you having to do anything. Does that sound acceptable to all parties involved, or
yes.
kind of explaining those things?
Well, with XRM base, you can also have there's an XRM real context class. You can also have it connected to CRM.
Yeah, but there's no additional.
In our
you don't do any automatic cleanup of data, though, right, Jordi?
No, because
no. Okay, cool.
It would be actually better for online to basically just start up with a new online instance. Like you can script it, because if you want to clean data, there's a bunch of things that happen, like transactions, and that couldn't necessarily clean the data and leave it at the same state, in the same state.
Yep.
So but in our case, I mean, for example, it depends on the project, but we don't really want to have automatically register plugins, because, for example, we may work on a project that basically we have like 600 plugins and we don't have unit tests for all of them. So we just really want to unit test or do integration tests for the things we actually care about. So
do you have dead code then? Why do you have 600 plugins that you don't all use? But also, I mean, it handles the state as well.
Because
just deactivate.
I mean, because it was inherited. We don't have unit tests for all, mainly because we started doing unit testing when some of those plugins already existed. So
but they're live in the system.
I know, yeah, but there's no point if doing unit tests for code that was running there and it didn't change.
Yeah, okay, but I mean, they will still be executed in the live system. So they could have influence. So if your unit test a small part of the system, and then it would be influenced by the other parts, then
basically your unit test could pass, but it's going to fail when you deploy. That's basically what you're saying. And yeah, that's kind of so my assumption is I don't have the ability to say that I'm going to be good enough to faithfully recreate everything in the org for you to do that. And so that's why I've put a lot of effort into automatically cleaning stuff up for your unit tests. So my unit test is like a base class that you normally write, and in it you define the GUIDs or the IDs that you're going to use in your unit tests, and by default the organizational service in there will not let you create something without a GUID defined for it. And so that way you help to limit the ability that you have anything that gets created outside it. Now, if you have a workflow that runs or a plugin that runs on the system, it's going to create duplicate data on the system. And if the delete of the parent records don't delete those, then yeah, you're going to have some issues and you'll have to mainly write some code to clean that up at the end of it.
Yeah, but in that case, in the case when we want to make sure the full end-to-end scenario works, we just use normal integration testing, like through context, or even just
So I think both Jordi and I are to the point of we can't handle thinking of all the different ways and registering correct all the different ways in our heads or automatically through just scripting to be able to handle all the different nuances and the ways things play together. And it sounds like, Magnus, your approach is, no, we are going to do that, and we are going to handle that to the best of our abilities. That's a fundamental difference, I think.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
XrmMockup is the promise that we are trying to recreate Xrm.
Yep.
And I mean, we trust in it.
Yeah.
We have used it on all our clients, right?
Yeah.
We believe it works.
we believe it will work. No, it's great. It's and every now and I think we all find issues of this isn't a faithful representation of what the actual CRM org is or what the CRM org is doing. Like, for example, I had someone that posted a bug yesterday or last week that you can change in my settings how naming gets created, whether it's first name, last name, and that kind of stuff. And I had a bug in there. And so, I mean, that bug's been in there for, since the creation of the framework. But, just finally now someone ran a unit test that actually took a dependency on that and like, hey, this is different than it is in prod. So, yeah. Yep. It's our fun edge cases that we find. So, Jonas, to go back to kind of your question too about how do we create all this data? How do we handle the stuff if you're new? And my experience when I started was, all right, I'm going to create this test data suite. That was my idea, where I'm going to create this standard thing of these entities are the things we use primarily, and at the beginning of each test I'll just go create that and then use it in my test, and that failed miserably. Mostly because I would just keep on adding things. I needed more tests, and so they got really, really complicated. And then I'm running into minutes to run the test rather than milliseconds to run the test. And it also made issues if I ever wanted to run it against a real live version of CRM. Now I had multi-threading issue, or I had race conditions where this test was running and this test was running, and they both depend on the same data. And yeah, it fell apart. So the methodology that I currently approach is you create everything for your test that you need, except if there is something that you do want to take a dependency on, I define that as an assumption, and you create a query that says, this is the thing that's going to exist in CRM, and you can run it once locally. It will go retrieve it and serialize it locally, and then you can run it in your unit test locally after that. So so you kind of can choose, hey, I'm going to make an assumption that this exists, and it uses data. I don't have to create it manually, as well as, hey, I'm going to create everything manually itself. So that's kind of the approach that I use in my framework stuff and then use in my unit testing. So.
All right. Yeah, that makes sense. Speaking of that, I mean, getting or assuming things are there. I've seen some occasions, and I've actually had a colleague working on this, where you sort of extract, serialize the entire context to be able to replay it afterwards. And I guess that's somewhat what the debugging scenario from Microsoft
the plugin registration tool does, right?
Yeah, exactly. But do any of you have that sort of built in? So run it once, get the data, and now we can use that as a sort of a template to start working from.
Yeah, it's basically I need to double check it because I can remember the name exactly. But basically, you can just when you attach, for example, to a plugin using the plugin profiler, you can get the context, and then that's basically serialized as a compressed XML, I think it was, and you can just grab it and then just pass it to a method, and it runs with that context. Yeah.
Okay.
I kind of use it for a couple of times for kind of troubleshooting basically issues, for example, in production. So I grab the context and then just debug it with that exact same set of data.
Yeah. We've been talking a lot about in-memory databases here and mocking your data and so on. Do any of you do any testing, sort of set up a CRM organization from a backup or from blank sort of vanilla state and start testing against that? Or is that's an entirely different scope if you're doing that?
I don't think I understand. Can you explain a bit more?
No, so instead of creating your in-memory database, you have a CRM organization that you're working against, and you're doing live testing or rather testing against a live CRM environment, even if it's a environment for testing or so on.
Yeah, that's what ADX Studio did back in the day with their whole framework. Basically, each developer had their own actual dev instance, and whenever they made changes and they wanted to go test them, they had a script that would go and recreate a brand new instance, populate it with data, and then run through all their tests. And so I think it took 2 hours or something. So you'd get everything ready, and you'd go break for lunch and come back or something like that. So that I have seen being done, but that is was more difficult before we had the chance to have instant online organizations stood up and ready to go. But I think that's becoming a little bit easier, but there's still a lot of management involved with that and costs, I would think, associated with that. Although now you can get free dev instances, but you still have to pay for the memory. So I personally don't find that approach to be as beneficial as some of the other ones.
Now, maybe it's better for more integration testing scenarios when you want to test entire flows,
exactly.
Even though Magnus's framework can sort of emulate the whole chain of events. But
Well, I think that's the whole Microsoft approach of the bringing your own test framework tools they have now. So you can actually go and take your unit tests that you've written and go push them give them to Microsoft, and they will run them on whenever they update your version of CRM. So that way you can know if they've broke you at least in the back end through a plugin or a custom action or something like that. So that is a nice feature.
We use that. In our case, we use that mainly for integration testing. So we have for online, you can provision instances using scripts, but for on-prem, basically, we just refresh basically database from iBackup, and basically we use that for integration testing. And for other things, basically, there are still some other testers in the team just doing some mild testing for other stuff. They can, but basically, we prefer to do integration testing because also even you can try to simulate everything. There's always code in CRM which is out of the box. You can, that it's running outside of plugins that you also need to test.
Well, that is what we have rewritten inside XrmMockup. So, I mean, we don't see the need to write these integration tests because if it is something that XrmMockup is missing, then we just write it for XrmMockup. We just make XrmMockup better.
But even if you're reinventing the wheel or actually building another wheel that already works, you just don't use it.
Yeah, because it's local, it's in memory. We have in-memory integration tests.
But I mean, when I'm talking about the out-of-the-box code in CRM, that's, for example, online, is always constantly changing. How can you...
Because it doesn't change that much. It doesn't change enough.
But it does change.
Well, I think that's the same sort of approach that I have where I don't go to that extreme at all. I'll back up a little bit. There's all these different methodologies for unit testing. There's I'm going to make these tiny little things and test every single thing, and then I'm going to work at integration tests as that. Most of my unit testing when it comes to CRM is I kind of take a best guess at a plugin. I write a unit test on a happy path. I think about maybe some negative paths I want to test and make sure I'm good, and then I push it. Now, if that's good or that's bad, I don't know. But what happens is I invariably miss something sooner or later, and I create a test for that, and then at that point in time, I can catch that test going forward. I think what Magnus is saying is whenever they run into something where their version of their in-memory is different than CRM Online, they go back and they recreate that whatever is needed at that point. So yes, it isn't 100% true because nothing could be 100% true because it's constantly changing outside of our control. But whenever they do find that, they go back and they clean it up. Right, Magnus?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Also, by using this approach, you can debug your integration tests.
Yeah.
Right, so you can step through all your plugin changes. I guess you can also do that in FakeXrmEasy.
I think that's the biggest thing that someone that doesn't do unit testing doesn't understand how powerful that is. Like I've come into projects where there's people that are spending an hour to go get their test. They get a test case in CRM working. If for some reason it's failing, so they open up the plugin registration tool. They get a trace for it. They get their Visual Studio up and running. They attach a debugger. They make a change. Okay, all right, let me go test this again. They go through the whole process again, where if you had a unit test for that, those updates and those testing and that debug and step through is seconds, not minutes or more. So yeah, that's a huge benefit, being able to debug your code via integration or a unit test.
That is definitely a takeaway from this, right? So if you don't, we're discussing from the top, right? So if you're not using any kind of way of executing your code locally, then go ahead and do that.
Yep.
You don't want to debug using some text or
all right. So which one should I use?
What do you want to test?
Just have a look at the software and decide for yourself.
But I have another question from an entirely different angle. I mean, these are all three open source. They are sort of community driven. I know Jordi gets lots of pull requests for his framework. Is this where it started? I want to do something and put it out there, or is it like, I guess, most now community driven tools that I need something, so I create it and then realize, hey, this isn't half bad. Maybe I should put it out there for others to use. So what's your background in going open source with this?
Well, we went open source because Jordi was open source. Not even kidding. So basically, we just saw what Jordi had. We didn't actually discover Daryl's until he made the YouTube video. But then we just saw that XrmMockup was doing so much more for us. At least we liked writing integration tests rather than unit tests. So we made it open source.
Okay.
Yeah, that's. I mean, the main thing that I want to have everyone take away here is don't go off and write your own framework again. Like,
No.
we've all managed to
so
do
many
it. We
right
all have
now.
different advantages and disadvantages, and I even try to come up with a chart of, why would you pick one versus the other? And I think it still goes back to, what sort of dependencies do you want to, how much do you want your in-memory unit tests to work like your actual version of CRM? And
Yeah. I have to say also, I mean, to mention, don't go writing your own again because others have done it. And it's so much better. I mean, if you find, okay, this doesn't really cut it, we need this or that, then do what so many people already do and suggest changes or implement changes and pass pull requests. That's just so much better for everyone. And I know there are probably organizations that feel like, oh, hey, we'd rather have our own stuff, or we can be inspired by others, but we'll create our own from scratch. And I'm just think,
take it and fork it, please. Fork something. I don't care.
Pull requests.
I think we all know there's the pain and effort and the amount of upfront effort was required to get this working and being able to be used. And so we just want that pain to be, we want other people to be able to use that and have a better life than what we had creating it, I think. So
that's noble of you.
Yeah. Well, we hope they do the same for us too.
Yes, of course.
So one of the things I want to call out and thing that I was always super jealous of, and I think was actually a big calling card for Jordi and his FakeXrmEasy was his whole website with the autocode little script thing that he wrote. And it basically was this little like player that just was HTML that was like typing out your how do you write a unit test thing. And I was like, oh dang, that's really cool. I just don't have time to go work on that and make anything like that. So that's always been something that is kind of jealous. And I guess my answer to that now is to use the Visual Studio Solution Accelerator to go and create your unit test and get everything set up for you so you can actually start debugging and have a working unit test going locally. Magnus, is there something in in your guys' framework that you have as a kind of a quick starter guide, or is it just your GitHub repository, or do you have something else out there?
Well, there are two things, right? So we have a sample framework project, so we have all our tooling in there. That's also open source. It's called XrmM framework because we like the word XrmM.
And that's just
also
that's a download of a whole solution, right? That's just a straight download.
Yeah, exactly.
Touch, right?
But we also have wiki pages where we have examples of how you can test against the different things.
Cool, awesome.
I guess basically it's the website that's set, but that one just has basically very basic examples and the repository have all the different examples, and also because the repository has more like 4,000 tests, you can also just look at those as examples as well.
Yeah.
So
I am happy to throw up my flag and say I don't want to maintain my local version of CRM anymore, and be able just to utilize one of the other frameworks. But the amount of dependencies that I have when I created it kind of keep me from doing that and still be able to use my methodology that I prefer to use when I write my unit tests. So that's kind of the thing that's been keeping me back. And now if I had 2 weeks to go through and do that, I'd probably write an integration for both, or I write an additional DLL that would be able to be used both in FakeXrmEasy as well as the XrmMock and be able to use that, because underneath, I mean, there's two things in my framework, and that's the underneath is the actual authorization service that gets mocked up. That's one thing, and then there's all this work about maintaining code that can run either locally or against the server and never have to change, and the work that's required to set things up. Like I have a whole bunch of builder classes, so if you want to define that you have an account that has an address that's located in Australia, rather than typing that for every single one of your unit tests, I have a builder that says, hey, you create your own method that says with an Australian address, and it just automatically will create that as an Australian address without you having to go through and define all the data each time. So that's one of the other things I've learned, is to use builders to help your life, not having to have everything hard-coded for every single test, but to be more declarative in what you're saying in your tests, rather than going through and hard-coding the data for every single thing. So, and unfortunately, I've sucked myself into that world and that way of doing things, and so I need to be able to expand that to the other frameworks before I said, okay, I can move on to something else. So, because as far as the number of pull requests that have been done by the community, I think Jordi's framework is the winner as far as that's concerned. But maybe that means he has the most bugs.
Yeah, exactly. It just means it needs fixing.
Yeah. So I could sleep a little bit more as well.
But
what about the JavaScript?
One thing that you guys are missing when I've been presenting XrmMockup at conferences is that a lot of people are pretty hyped that they can test workflows, and not just code activities, but the actual workflows. So when are you guys going to get that in your testing frameworks?
So that means you're downloading the actual workflow and running it locally?
Yeah. I have an interpreter, so I built the abstract and syntax tree for the workflow. And
so the only time I'm going to get that is if I go and steal your code from GitHub. But besides that, I'm not going to implement that myself. But that's a good idea.
It's open source.
It's open source. It's not stealing.
Well, it's relying heavily upon thereof and appreciating and sending a nice tweet to the appreciation thereof. So yes.
Yeah. And how basically, in that case, how does that work with like DLLs, like code activities? For example, third-party DLLs that you have.
Well, then for those parts, it doesn't work. But cool. Yeah. So we got a pull request for like how do you run send email, and basically he just wrote send an email and then created an email in the database, right? So that's sending an email.
Yeah.
And you're also missing testing security roles. Right?
Yeah, that part I said that's going to be way too confusing to define. So that's my issue. So for you, you're actually just pulling. Like, how do you go through and define that? How do you go through and define that? Hey, this is the user I'm testing with has this role, and this role has these rights. Like, how do you define that in your unit test?
An organization service is bound to a specific user, right? So you just get an organization service for a user with those security roles.
All right.
So we have helpers for creating users and teams.
All right. So this goes back to the whole, how much of a dependency do you want to have on your org versus not on your org? So if you're an ISV provider, you can have your own set of unit tests, that's fine. But if you want to be able to test against someone else's org, you wouldn't be able to really do that very well with that sort of idea, right?
No, exactly. Yeah. It just comes from the idea that when you're with the customer, you write detailed user stories like, as this security role, I would be able to do this, right? So you should be able to test that as well.
Yeah, my first project, we didn't do anything with like user roles and testing things, and we failed so hard in QA the first like 10 times we deployed before we finally figured, oh, okay, we actually do have to care about these roles. So yeah, that's a really nice feature that exists. So yeah, Jonas, back to your question, which one do you pick? I mean, I guess if you want to be able to test a workflow right now, or if you want to be able to do a whole bunch of testing with roles and security around those roles, what they can do, can't do, and catch that in your unit tests, then that's a Magnus. That's the Xrm mock stuff. But my answer to that is I don't worry about mocking that locally. That's a test I do when you run it against your actual CRM org. But yeah.
Yeah, I guess that has been your take, right? So actual integration tests, but these pseudo integration tests.
Yeah, I get lazy and I say I don't want to have to define all the stuff in my unit tests. I'll just define what I think works, and then I'll run it against the real life version. And if it passes, hey, I'm happy. So yeah.
So I heard now that you define tests for what you think work. It sounds like a winning story.
What you think? Well, it sounds like a winning story. When do you have a winning story?
Like then tests always pass because you create tests for what you think works.
Well,
That's a good approach.
95% of the time, my first unit test that I write fails. And half the times because I didn't write the test right, or I forgot an image, or forgot a pre-image, or forgot a target or variable in the target or something when I'm going through and defining what data is coming in. And the other half of the times, I always have some bug, one or two in my actual project. So, and that's, I guess, another point is I get really internally I get upset, but I never show it to anybody when everyone says I don't have time for unit testing. I'm like, well, if you took 2 days to kind of learn how to go through and set that up and work in whatever framework, and you got really comfortable with it, that's probably 2 days worth of work is my guess of, all right, here's how I create the test, here's how I go use it, great. And you get really comfortable with that. After that upfront cost, the amount of time it takes you to write a unit test is going to be about the same amount of time it takes to write the code without the unit test, because I can almost guarantee you're going to have a bug of some sort that you're going to have to catch in dev, and you're going to have to spend time finding that bug in dev that's running on the server, and it's just a whole lot more, your dev cycle is a whole lot longer doing it that way. So generally, I am under the rule that as long as you've spent 2 days working with it, you can write unit tests. You can write your plugins with unit tests with the same amount of speed as writing it without unit tests.
Yeah.
Also, if I can add something to that. Basically, is that it's not just the development time; it's also the testing time for testers, and then the testing to like post deployment as well. That you're saving because you possibly spot something like could be like a regression issue, and it basically was spotted because the build was broken. No. Yeah.
A rough estimate for me is about 80% of my unit tests that I write, I catch a bug that I would not have caught probably testing just in dev and would have gone to QA. And so now I've wasted QA resources and deployment resources on top of that if I wouldn't have caught that in my unit tests. So that's that's where I feel I'm at. It's about 80% of the time I find something that I wouldn't have caught just by running a test in dev and saying, yep, it works, go ship it. So that's, totally with you. So we've gone through some of the other differences that we've had in the frameworks. Magnus called out being able to run workflows, being able to run security. Or is there anything else in in your framework that we haven't called out as far as something that we're missing that you have?
Do you want me to call additional things out?
Yeah, anything you have that's unique. I mean, I don't spend a whole lot of time working in a framework because I know my own framework. What else? I'm interested.
I was pretty hyped when we got 4D testing work.
4D testing.
Time. Yeah, so when you include time as well, so you can say run this now. Assume you are 2 days later ahead, right? And then you do some other operation. So usually you have some user stories where whenever I create something, then if I do something 2 days later, this should happen. You can also do that in XrmMockup. We have a shorthand for adding time.
Okay. Wow. That confuses me. That hurts my head.
What do you mean by adding time?
So sometimes you would have plugins that listen to all updates, but only do something if the modified on day, or no, not the modified on, but assume that you have some created date, and you would only do some operation after a certain number of days. It'll also be the same for any waiting workflows and so on. If you want to test those, your test would have to wait a certain number of days.
So you can sort of tell the debugger or the where you're executing that the server clock has now accelerated 2 days.
Exactly.
Okay. So if we run this now again and 2 days have passed, what would happen then?
Yeah, exactly. So you just specify in your test, you just call this helper function add 2 days, and then the rest of your test will run, right?
Wow.
That's basically for the waiting workflow.
Yeah.
Because, but not for logic that is built in with the plugin, because that can be simulated by just.
If you have a unit test. Yeah. I guess it's probably just a problem for us.
Okay. All right.
Not really.
That's interesting. Interesting.
Okay.
Feature they have there. Anything else, Magnus, that we're gonna miss on?
Nah, I think the rest of it is just plumbing.
All right, Jordi, anything that we're missing in your framework that makes it unique? Let me back up a little bit. my framework requires to have early bound entities in order to run to do the metadata. I know Jordi's does not. You can use either early binding if you want to ensure your types are there, or you can use late binding, and as long as you don't confuse your types, i.e. this attribute's a string the first time, then a date the next time, you're fine. Magnus, what do you require early binding or not early binding?
No, we just give you an I organization service. You can do whatever.
Okay.
You can use whatever testing you want with it.
So is there a way to enforce your typing in that as well then, or how does that work? Is that just the first time you give it something that's going to assume that typing?
It doesn't matter, right? It's just an entity.
Metadata.
Just get entities in. It's just whatever comes in through the requests.
Okay. So if I go to create an entity and I give it an attribute that exists, but it's a wrong type, and I'm doing some late bound coding, there's no catch for that in your unit test.
Yeah, there's, but that's based upon the metadata.
Oh, you download the metadata. There you download the metadata.
Yeah,
all right, I got that. All right, so you're actually downloading the whole metadata in order to take that assumption and do that, and that gets checked in, I'm guessing, as well. All right, go ahead, Jordi.
No, sorry, just FakeXrm, you can also combine late bound with entity metadata as well. So, and then you can define the metadata in code, or you can read it from file as well.
Cool.
That's actually pretty cool. So you can add metadata to your database.
Yeah. That was mainly for the messages that were like related to metadata, like for example, retrieve entity request, to be able to test those, and also for just kind of overcoming that challenge with late bound, where the framework doesn't know really which type it is, because it was assuming based on the data. Like for example, when you have a CSV file in Excel and just put like a bunch of rows, it determines the type based on the first couple of rows. So it was kind of the same idea, but with late bound. But when you combine late bound with fake metadata, then that basically goes away.
So I guess that's one thing my framework doesn't have is the metadata is the early binding for me. So I don't require to go through and download anything to get any other additional typing, but I do require that to be downloaded. Although you don't have to code in early binding, you can use late binding if you'd like. So yeah.
Some of the guys basically added a feature to be able to actually automatically set up metadata based on the early bound type, so you don't have to actually generate it unless you need to actually do something with metadata. Like for example, if you want to, for example, check the string attribute metadata has length of whatever, those things. But if you don't need to do anything with that, then that is the easiest thing to do. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, and whenever I get to the point where there's something that requires metadata, there's if I can pull it from the early binding, I will, like option sets and return back a text value. I'll return back a text value that may not match exactly, but it will be the text representation of that's in the formatted attributes collection. But yeah, besides that, I require you to fake something if you ever need to actually get the metadata, which is, I always try to get the 90%, and that's part of the 10% in my opinion. But you guys have done that, so that's awesome. Yeah, one other thing that I guess, Jordi, is there anything else in your framework that we should be aware of that maybe ours don't have?
Client-side unit testing.
Oh yes, that's a big plus. Yeah, so you're able to actually use your in-memory locally to actually test your JavaScript test and be able to do CRM Web API calls.
Yeah, basically this is just a project for just mocking Web API, but from JavaScript or like TypeScript perspective. So it's still very much in progress, but you can basically the same idea. You simulate the Web API calls using any memory data that the memory data is just using TypeScript, so similar to the backend, the .NET side of things. So
that's cool.
Do you actually have that complex client-side code that it needs testing?
We do have it. We, for example, we have, custom React components we develop on top of, CRM. So, yeah.
You should make those some PCF controls.
Well, yeah. Well, we started using React before PCF existed, so. Yeah. But actually, maybe.
And is that a different framework, Jordi, or is that just called the same thing, your JavaScript stuff?
It's almost the same. It's just fake-xrm-easy-js.
Right.
Although the name is not accurate because it has been rewritten in TypeScript. So you can use it for both JavaScript and TypeScript because you have the definitions as well. But,
cool. And I believe you have your own set of definitions that aren't from the definitely typed definitions, correct?
It's using for some types. And also I have another project basically explains how to set up and use that along with the Dave Clark's XrmMock, which is for the XrmX.
Yep, I did a lot of work on that when I was working on that too, that XrmMocks. Yep.
So basically, there's a repository you can just take a look to. That basically is an example about, really basic example, but shows how to combine both for doing some client-side testing, combining basically form logic and web API calls.
Cool.
Yeah.
Wow, that's something I didn't know. That's awesome.
Hmm.
Anything else, Jordi? That was a big one that we would have missed. I want to make sure everyone hears that.
That's I don't know. That's pretty much. I think basically the project is basically. I got so many pull requests that actually I can even remember what's in there. Geez, really, it changes almost every single week, and yeah.
Yeah,
so.
That's awesome. I think I get a pull request about every 3 months, maybe 4. So cool. I'm trying to think if there's anything in my framework I haven't talked about yet. One thing that's this is so silly. It's so simple. Like, I don't know why I like it so much, but I created an ID class, okay? And you're like, oh, Daryl, what the heck is an ID class? All it is a typed class that has auto conversions to the different types for an entity. So when you have an entity, it can either be an entity reference, it could be an entity, it can be a GUID, and it could be like a string to be the logical name of that entity, basically. And there are so many times in unit tests where I always hated to call like toEntityReference or even the .id. I'm so lazy. But it has implicit operations in there to implicitly convert it for you automatically. And so that little ID class with implicit operations is so simple and so small, but I love using it so much. So that's just something. It's not even. I mean, theoretically, you could even just not even make it unit test based, but I use it so much when I'm generating my really bound entities. It's a nice feature to have. So I guess that's one last thing I could think of. So Jonas, here's my question: do you feel like you have any idea of what the heck we talked about today?
Yes.
Okay.
Actually, I do. Okay. Yeah, and I'm thinking if I want to find the sort of incentive for me to start using this, I think it's this. Okay, if I have tests, I can do the debugging.
Yes, I think
I can execute the code.
That's the big one.
I mean, it's a good selling point. And then I know you will hate me for this, but I still have a hard time finding, okay, we want to test the small methods, test everything small. Yeah, but the small methods are really easy or simple. Don't need to test those. I want to test the big things. That's the complicated stuff, the scenarios. That's where I have my bugs usually. It's not in the small methods, it's in the big integration scenarios. But that's another story for another day.
Yeah, that's going to be a story of you structuring your code maybe a little bit differently. So to never have the big ones, but yes.
No, I don't necessarily mean the big chunks of code, but I mean the scenarios where they are interacting in ways that might not have been sort of pictured beforehand. Yeah.
That is why you have XrmMockup, so it does it automatically. Mimics your system.
Automatically.
Yeah, and I guess if I was sending people to the moon, I'd probably would be around the XrmMockup type of idea to try to do everything. But for me, I try to find the line where I catch 90% and don't worry about the last 10%. And whenever the bug does happen, I just add the missing test, the thing that I'm missing, and try to just be as quick and as productive as possible with my time. But then again, I'm not doing anything that's going to kill anybody if I get it wrong. So I may change that. They might send a gift card to 2 different people rather than only to one person. That's about the worst thing I think I could do. And so I may just maybe made somebody's day for all I know. But that's what I struggle with. So. Well, Jordi, it's great having you on. It's great having you on the podcast here, and I am still concerned here that somehow you managed to drop out of the MVP ranks, and so I'm still waiting for that to come back in, because that was one that really confused me as far as what like this is like this is the framework everybody uses.
Now I'm surprised.
So yeah, I'm hoping that we can bring you back into the fold at some point in time in the near future. So So yeah, so Jordi, thanks for joining us, and Magnus, thanks for coming back to back weeks. This is kind of you've become a regular occurrence. And I think is he the first back to back guest that we've had, or the first guest that we've had twice?
I think so, actually.
Yeah, we haven't even had Tanguy on here twice. So Magnus, I think you're
no. I need to give Tanguy a call. Maybe it's time.
It's time.
He has some new stuff coming.
He has to be a hat trick before Tanguy is.
Totally. So I'll just ask you guys to make sure you send me links to whatever you want me to post for this, and so we can share that with our guests. So, yeah, I think that's all I got. Anything else you want to add, Jonas?
Yep. No, I'm good for now.
Good for now.
Going back to my holiday planning here in Sweden.
Is it no longer whatever it is in Celsius, 30 degrees out there? What's the temperature?
No, the weather is actually very sort of back and forth all the time here, and we're getting slightly worried. We're having a little occasion on Saturday. We're having a wedding outdoors, so then you're quite dependent on the weather. So that'll be interesting. I wished I could do some unit testing on the weather forecast or something.
That would be more like machine learning prediction.
Yes.
Very intense machine learning.
That'd be a good approach.
Okay. So thank you, guys. And I want to, as usual, remind everyone, if you want to get in touch with us, you can send an email to XrmToolCast at... no, sorry, I did it wrong. Damn, Daryl, you're the one who usually gets this wrong. Okay, cast@xrmtoolbox.com or Twitter @XrmToolCast. And how about you guys? Jordi, how can people reach you in the best way?
They can reach me on LinkedIn or Twitter. Jordi Montaña is my Twitter handle, and otherwise just on GitHub, Jordi Montaña 82. And there's my Gmail address.
Okay, all right, great. Magnus?
Yeah, also on GitHub, but just go on Twitter. XrM Wizard.
XrM Wizard.
Very humble.
XrM Wizard. Yes, and I'm going to end with it. If you're not doing any unit testing, just pick one of the frameworks and go. If you have any questions, any of us will answer whatever questions you have. I'm speaking for everyone else, but I'm assuming that's the way it is, because I'm happy to someone's struggling with something or whatever, and we all have our own little methods for how to get started with it. And hopefully this was helpful for you to do that, and hopefully you can raise the bar of your unit testing for you and your org. So, yep, I went there. Thanks, Jordi. Thanks, Magnus.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Bye.
Cheers, guys.
Bye.
This has been the Xrm Toolcast with Jonas Rapp and Daryl Labar. If you have any questions for Jonas or I, or suggestions for future episodes, please send them to cast@xrmtoolbox.com or tweet to XrmToolCast.